Guys, back. Basically, the context of this vlog today is I wanted to do something a little bit different to a weekly vlog, and I actually wanted to talk about pretty much everything to do with moving from England to Australia. So if you didn't know, I am originally from London. I had lived in London all of my life up until I went to uni. I went to uni up in Manchester. I studied at uni for 3 years, and then I actually decided to continue to stay in Manchester after my uni degree finished for another 2 years, I think it was, it ended up being. So it was about 5 years in total that I ended up being in Manchester before I decided to pretty much make the move across the world and come here to Australia. That's kind of the vague, very vague overview. I've been living in Sydney now for 3.5 years. So I moved in February 2020, literally just before, maybe about 4 to 6 weeks before COVID really kicked off in Australia and they shut the borders. So genuinely moving to Australia was one of the best things I've ever done in my life. I just figured that this video will likely help someone out there. And you know what, actually all of the time I have people from home messaging me, people that I'm not even necessarily like good friends with or was good friends with, but maybe I just met them at the time, or a friend of a friend, or like whatever it might be. I get so many messages from people asking me what it's like out here, whether they should move, what they need to know. And I know I was the same before I moved out here. I remember messaging a girl that I used to work with to ask her like everything about it. So yeah, I just thought this video would be super helpful. And if there are any questions that I haven't answered that you guys would like to know, just leave them below in the comments and I'll get back to you with some answers. But yeah, I think let's dive straight into this video. I'm super excited to talk about this. So yeah, let's get started. I thought I would start with why I decided to move to Sydney. So like I already said, I moved in February 2020. And look, put it this way, I had always wanted to move to Australia, like literally always. Like it had always been a dream of mine to do, but you know what it's like, there's never a right time, there's always something that gets in the way, there's always an excuse, there's always this or that, you know, like you put those doubts in your head. So anyway, at this time, I pretty much said to myself that I was going to save up for another 2 years, like quite a long period. I was working full time at this point, but that I would save up for another 2 years so that when I moved out here, you know, I would just be in a position where I had a good amount of money behind me and I really didn't need to worry about basically coming over here. Like I could just live my best life. So that happened. That was my initial thought process, right? So what actually kind of ended up happening, which to speed along my timeline, was one of my best friends, Alana, I used to work with her back in the UK and she is Australian. So she had already moved back to Australia after living in the UK for a number of years. And I had decided that she was like one of my best friends back home. She still is one of my best friends. So I had decided that I wanted to come over to visit her. And this would have been December 2021. No. That's a complete lie. This would have been December 2019. So I flew out and I had booked a whole itinerary. So I was pretty much seeing as much as I could in a 3-week period, like literally Melbourne, Sydney, all the east coast of Queensland, like heaps, like probably way too much. Like it was a full-on trip. And the main part was so that I could get to go and see my friend and really just spend some time with her. And I was also kind of using that as a good, I guess like a tester almost, to make sure that I would actually be happy living here. Because obviously, you know, I'd had this idea in my head that I always wanted to move here, but like I'd never been to this country. So yeah, I decided to use that as my testing the waters, see if I would actually like it. And genuinely within about 24 hours of getting off the plane, I was like, I'm gonna move here. But I couldn't really finalize anything at that stage because I was there on a tourist visa or a holiday visa, like whatever they call it. Like I had no work rights or anything like that. I was literally just there for this holiday, and I wasn't allowed to apply for my first working holiday visa whilst in the country. So I had to wait till I got back home, which was like a month later. Anyway, literally I remember as soon as I landed back in Manchester, I went straight online, applied for my visa, got approved like literally within minutes, and then booked my flights that same day. Like it was great. And then the next day I handed in my notice at work, and a few weeks later I was on a plane out here. So yeah, that's kind of the journey of why. I guess I didn't really explain the why. The why is just I had just always viewed Australia as this place where it was sunny all the time, warm. And if you've ever been to Manchester, like the weather's pretty atrocious. Like it genuinely rains all the time. It's grey, it's cold, and I feel like we'd had some awful winters where like not even winters, awful summers where it's just been horrible the whole time. Like I just wasn't, I'm a sunny summer girl. Like that's where I'm happiest. So yeah, it was just wanted to be by the beach, wanted to do something different, and yeah, that's kind of pretty much why I decided to move. So after I had booked everything and handed in my notice from work, although I was living in Manchester, I actually booked my flights to leave from London, and I flew from London over to Sydney. And what I actually ended up doing was I had my last day at work, I think on a Thursday. I drove down to did I drive? No, I didn't drive. I'd already sold my car at this point. I hired a man in a van to drive me and all of my belongings from Manchester to where my mum lives. And then about 2 days after that, I had my flight. So it was all very, very, very quick. I think I flew over here with Emirates that time. I feel like I've done that journey a few times. I've flown with Swiss Air, Emirates, and British Airways. Emirates and Swiss were both very good flights. The British Airways I wouldn't recommend. However, I am flying with them again when I go back home at Christmas this year. So wouldn't recommend, but I'm still doing it because it was the cheapest flight. So, you know, take that with a pinch of salt. So yeah, my mum then drove me to the airport. Actually, my mum and my dad both came to the airport to drop me off, and then I embarked on that 24-hour flight by myself, which really actually wasn't that bad. Like once you're set up with movies and stuff, you know, it is what it is. You get on with it. A good question to ask would be things that you need to know as soon as you arrive. And really like the main things that you need to do straight away are tax file number, which means if you are looking to go get a job or whatever it might be, you need a tax file number to be able to apply for anything. I think you need your tax file number before you can set up a bank account. I'm pretty sure. So yeah, tax file number, bank account, set up a super fund if you're gonna get a job out here. And to be honest, I feel like those are the three real main things. Obviously, you know, you're gonna be looking for a place to live. How did I deal leaving with my friends and family? So like I said, I moved here Feb 2020, about 4 to 6 weeks before COVID really kicked off in Australia and everything shut down. And I don't know if anyone remembers at that time, but Australia was literally having a full-on meltdown, as were many other countries in the world at this point. But basically what ended up happening was there were all of these rumors that flights were going to completely stop and there would be no way in or out of the country. So was in just a bit of a predicament where didn't know if I had enough money to, well, you didn't know how long you were going to be potentially stuck somewhere. So I didn't know if I had enough money to be able to cover living here and surviving here, right? So I remember one morning I literally called my mum and I was just like, I think we're gonna have to come home. Like I don't know what we're gonna do here if we don't have enough money. I'm gonna come home. And my mum, bless her, I feel like she just never, not that she never wanted me to move here, but she doesn't like me being away from her, right? So she was like, oh yeah, move home, it's okay, you can come live with me again. And I was speaking to my dad as well at the same time. My parents are divorced. And my parents are also just polar opposites. I spoke to my dad and I was explaining the same thing to him, and you know, I guess I was in a very fortunate position because dad just turned around and said, look, stay there. This is like a once in a lifetime thing. If you get to a position where you're struggling for money, like we can take care of it. Like don't stress about that. So I was forever grateful for that, because had dad not have said that in that moment of time, I wouldn't be here. So thanks dad for that if you're watching. So yeah, that kind of sort of summed it up, because in that period of not knowing what we were going to do, you know, your big pull is family, right? So that was definitely a huge decision for us. Now, sort of since then, like, I mean, I've been here 3.5 years. So whilst I do, of course, miss family and friends, you know, a lot of my friends were in London. And like I said, I've been living in Manchester for 5 years. So those friends I was already kind of used to not seeing very frequently. My friends in Manchester, I did like a big going away party, and I still keep in touch with a few of them, like my really, really close friends. And my family, of course, you know, I keep in touch with them all the time. And again, you know, I just sort of realized that you can't base your life off of where other people are, because when I left, you know, my mum had actually already moved to where she lives now, which is just like a little countryside village. And my dad was still living in London. My brother and sisters both also still live in London. But you know, people have just got their own lives. Like my brother's got 2 kids. My dad's just retired, so he's off like, you know, doing his own thing. I feel like you need to live for you and not for people around you, and your family love you and, you know, they'll support you in your decisions. And I just talk to them all the time on WhatsApp, FaceTimes, and you just go plan to go do things. So obviously COVID threw a spanner in the works because it meant we didn't go home for like 2.5 years, but we flew home April 2022 for about 3 weeks. So that was lovely seeing everyone for the first time in ages. And then this year, I am actually in about 3 weeks from today, actually it'll be a couple of weeks from when this video goes out. I am going on holiday with all of my family, like my mum, my brother, my sister, my brother's kids, and things like that. So I'll see all of them. And then Dad's actually coming over to visit in October for 6 weeks. So, you know, you just make it work. Like, it's fine, and you make it work, and, you know, life moves on. How much money did I save before I moved here? So I think that's a hard question to answer, because I don't think I necessarily I didn't know that I was going to move as quickly as I did, because like I said earlier, I thought it was going to be a couple of years till I moved. So I actually ended up moving within, well, a month after making the decision to move, I moved. So I didn't necessarily save specifically for the move. I had savings, yes. However, I didn't specifically save anything. I think when you sign up for your working holiday visa, you've got to show enough funds in your bank account that basically would cover you to survive for a little bit here and be able to leave the country as well. So, you know, you just figure it out, you get by. Honestly, I would not stress about money. Like, I just think everything works out. You always find a way. You'll be able to come here, you can get a job, you'll find something out, you'll be able to make some money. So, you know, if you're saving, there's never going to be, again, the perfect time. There's always going to be a little bit more that you can save, or another bonus that's due at work, or whatever it might be. There's always going to be something. Like, you just need to stop with the excuses and just go. Of course you need a little bit of money before you go, but genuinely, I have friends that have moved out here that came with no savings at all, and, like, you know, they're getting on fine, they're still traveling, they're still living their best life. So yeah, I really just think it's fine to not be stressed about money when you move over here. Speaking of money, I often get asked, and actually I even ask myself this a lot, is which place is more expensive? Comparing London to Sydney, I used to think, okay, so when I first moved here, I thought Sydney was way more expensive, okay? It is definitely in some aspects, but when I went back home at Easter, I could not believe how expensive things were in London. Like, I mean, when we mainly in the aspects of going out to eat and drink, I definitely noticed that was much more expensive in London than it is over here. In other aspects, like, it kind of balances itself out, you know. Transport in London is extortionate. Transport here is so cheap. Food shopping is very expensive over here, especially vegetables. For some reason, they're very expensive. Food shopping in England, when we went back home, we were in Waitrose, which, like, is a nice supermarket and usually one of the more expensive supermarkets, and I couldn't believe how cheap everything was. I was literally like, how did I used to think that this was expensive? Like, this is dirt cheap now to me in comparison, right, to Aussie prices. Living costs, I think, are similar. You know, like, London rents are very expensive. The one thing I would say though actually is London rents are very high, and a lot of the time you're paying something extortionate for quite an old apartment that's not that close to the city centre. Obviously London city centre is massive, but, like, you know, you're not usually in, like, zone 1 or 2 unless you're paying a lot of money. Whereas in Sydney, I mean, look, we got quite lucky. Our rent on this apartment's pretty cheap, but rent is expensive, but you're getting nicer facilities, nicer places, nicer amenities with your apartment. So I think overall I would probably say the accommodation works out cheaper in Sydney. I guess that all comes into perspective though as well, because you would definitely earn a lot more money in Sydney than you do in England. And bear in mind, London's a very expensive place to live. And I know people say, oh, but you get paid more in London. I don't think you get paid that much more to justify how much more expensive it is to live in London. Whereas in Australia overall, I think the minimum wage is like, I don't know what it is. I think it's maybe like $24 or something, which is like £12 an hour. And that's minimum wage. Like, obviously the majority of people in Australia, they really push for a fair wage here. So most people are earning much more than that. So overall, I think your quality of life in Australia is just so much better because you've got disposable income. Like, it's just so different, honestly. What is it like finding a place to rent? So, like many places at the moment, Sydney is having a massive rental crisis. So at the moment, if you're trying to move, very expensive. All of the rents have shot up, and B, the places just go off the market so quickly. I actually, back in England, used to work for a real estate company that was doing lettings, right? So I was very experienced in that, and honestly, some of the places that we were letting, nice apartments, right, but sometimes they would be sat empty for weeks because there was just so much supply and not enough demand. Whereas in Sydney, it's just like the complete opposite. Like, there are far too many people here for the number of apartments. Like, it's just crazy. But so when we initially moved over, we were living in a place called Clovelly, which is right down by the beach. Loved living there. The house was massive. We were in a house share with a few other people. We had this huge, our bedroom actually was probably like 2/3 of the size of my apartment, like my whole apartment now. It was massive. We had his and hers showers. We had a huge walk-in wardrobe room. Like, it was great. We were paying a lot of money for it, but that time, right, was right before COVID was here. So that was just, you know, we just knew that you were going to be paying that sort of money. Then COVID hit, and we actually went to go stay with one of Stephen's cousins for a few weeks, just whilst we tried to find a cheaper place to live. And luckily, we were grateful that they managed to help us out for that period of time. We then moved to Waterloo, which is much cheaper to live than the eastern suburbs. However, I would not move back there again. It's just, you're quite far from everything, and there's not really much going on there. Like, it really is just apartment buildings. And ever since then, actually saying that, that's a lie. After that, we moved to Double Bay, which is like quite a nice area of Sydney. It's where quite a lot of the, like, I guess, wealthier people live. They call it Double Bay, Double Pay. And again, we were in a house share there. We had a pool. Like, it was great. It was like proper Aussie experience. And really, that's where we started making a lot of friends, because we really got on with the people in that house. Like, they were just our kind of people. So it was just like a really great fun time in that house. And pretty much ever since then, we actually got asked to leave that house because the landlord was knocking it down and rebuilding. So ever since then, we've been living in Bondi Junction. So at the moment, Stephen and I, we just have our own place, which is where I'm filming, and it's just a 1-bed apartment in the Junction. And honestly, like, we have toyed with the idea of moving closer to the beach, but really the Junction just has everything for us. Like, you're walking distance to the cinema, to the shops, to the train station, to the bus station. Like, everything is just here. Whereas if you move down to the beach, you're either always a 30-minute walk to public transport, or you've got to get the bus to the train station, and it's just more hassle than it's worth. So yeah, that's kind of like living situations. I would say if you are moving over here, that you should try and set up accommodation in advance, because honestly, Airbnbs are expensive, especially in the major cities. But you can use websites like Flatmates is a really good one to find, or joining Facebook groups. So we found this apartment that we live in now on Facebook Marketplace, and the other places that we have used are, what's it called? On Facebook, there's 2 Facebook groups. One's called Irish Around Sydney, one's called English Around Sydney. So we're in both of those Facebook groups, and loads of people will post like apartments or even just like rooms to rent in apartments. So that's really good to try find your accommodation that way. What do I miss from the UK? Now, aside from the obvious, friends and family, there are very few things that I miss. I'm going to be completely honest with you. There's absolutely nothing I miss from Manchester. Let me just put that out there. I loved living in Manchester at the time. I had a great time at uni. I had a great time after uni. I met some amazing people. But the actual place, in fact, it was just the weather. Honestly, if Manchester had better weather than it did, I would have probably liked it a lot more. But I just remember at that time, I would always have on my weather app Manchester and London, and I would compare the two, and London always had nicer weather and less rain, and I hated that thought. So I'm going to rule Manchester out of this one. But London, I do miss living in, I know Sydney's a big city, but I miss London as a big city. Like, there's so much to do in London. London is massive. Like, there's always a bar that you could go to, always a restaurant that you want to try. Like, there's always something going on. And it's just so busy. Like, I love the busyness of it. So I do definitely miss that. But honestly, like, aside from that, there's really not many things that I miss. There's a couple of food items that I miss, but you know, you can get by without prawn cocktail crisps, which is really the only thing that I properly miss. And actually, maybe the one thing I could say is like a country pub. Like, that's not really a thing over here. You don't have nice pubs where you'd go and have a roast dinner on a Sunday. Like, that's not really a thing. So aside from that, I don't think I've really missed very much. Maybe it's proximity to Europe, but then can you really even use that as what I miss from being in the UK is being close to Europe. Like, you're close to so many amazing places out here. And I guess that takes me on to what do I prefer about Australia? And that list could go on for a little while. So I guess the first thing I would say, and one of the main things I say when people do ask me about Australia, is the quality of life. It's unmatched. It doesn't compare to the UK at all. Your whole lifestyle here is so different. Firstly, people are very early morning people. You know, it's completely socially acceptable to meet a friend at 7 o'clock in the morning to go for a drink, like a coffee, not an alcoholic drink, like a tea or a coffee or whatever it might be. I'll go for breakfast at 7 o'clock. You would never do that in England. I don't think I've ever gone out for breakfast in England aside from with my family to go get fry up. Like, it's just not the same. Like, it's a very active culture here, you know, you're wearing activewear most of the time, you're out and about, you're going for walks, you're going for beach walks, you're going to swim, you're going to a gym class with someone. Like, it's very active here. There's just lots of that going on. Like, since I've been here, I've taken up golf, I've taken up tennis, I want to take up horse riding, but it's so expensive over here, so that's kind of been put on the back burner, but I would love to take that up as well. And just your overall quality of life is much better. You find that because the wages tend to be higher here, you've got a lot more disposable income than you had in the UK. So that just gives you more freedom to do things, right? And I guess, you know, if you were living in London and you had like a really high paying job, like, great, you've got that anyway. But I find that for the majority of people, and the people that I know out here, most of them have more disposable income in Sydney than they would do wherever they're from in the UK. So that's definitely made a big difference. You know, that's really enabled us to travel. Like, we've traveled heaps since we've been able to travel after COVID. We've traveled so much, and honestly, I feel very, very, very grateful to be in a position where, like, you know, we do just book these trips and we don't really, you know, have to think too much about them because we're just in a very comfortable position where we can do that. So, you know, and I understand not everyone in Sydney has that experience, but this is just my personal experience. And like I've said in other videos, you know, I really prioritize travel at the moment, and genuinely all of my disposable income goes to travel pretty much. Your other obvious ones, obviously the weather. It is usually warmer here today, actually. So it's, what date is it today? It is July 15th, and it is basically peak of winter. So winter started in June, so we're 6 weeks into winter, 6 weeks to go. It was 23 degrees today. And I actually was wearing this hoodie out and about because you do acclimatize, but you know, that's not bad going for a winter. So yeah, definitely the weather makes a huge difference. I'm trying to think of what else. I feel like everything just comes down to quality of life. Like, that's such an important factor, right? Is how you're going about living your day. And yeah, I'm much happier over here. I feel like I am prioritizing myself, my health. I don't drink as much. I don't like go on wild nights out as much anymore. You know, maybe that's also, you know, I'm just getting older, but it's just a nicer place to be in all aspects. Like, I honestly couldn't recommend it enough. How did I make friends, or how did I find it making friends? Now, I am the first person to say that I really struggled to make friends over here. So when we moved, I obviously moved with Steven, so, you know, he was like my comfort zone, and maybe that hindered me in a way because, you know, if you've got someone there, you don't necessarily feel like you need to put yourself out there. And I definitely didn't put myself out there when we first moved over. I wouldn't even know where to have started at that point in time. So when we first moved over, we were in that share house, and there was one guy in that share house who we really got on with, and we were like pretty good friends with him. And then obviously COVID happened and we went into lockdown. So from there, it wasn't even like you could put yourself out there to make friends. Like, it was just, you couldn't do anything. You couldn't socialize with anyone. All the bars are closed. There was no sports going on. Like, it was, and that was for like a good, maybe like 6 months or something. I feel like it was a really long time. Anyway, eventually in like the July, like genuinely, like how many months is it? Like 4 or 5 months it took me till we actually met people properly. And that was because Stephen ended up playing football with someone that he worked with, and they just so happened to be in a group where it was like guys and their girlfriends. So I met a group of people through that. And then kind of from there, the issue with that was that some of those people were on like working holiday visas as well. So they ended up leaving the country after a certain amount of time. And then you're kind of just like back to square one of trying to make friends again. So I actually ended up making most of my friends through Facebook, which when I tell people this, they're like, how? Like, that's so strange. And there's just like these groups on Facebook, and I would highly recommend joining them if you are moving over here, especially if you're moving over by yourself. And they're called like Sydney Girls Meetup, or I don't know, I can't remember exactly what they're called, but there's like quite a few of them. Like if you just search like Sydney friends groups or whatever they're called, and you can just join up to those, or even actually in Irish around Sydney and English around Sydney, sometimes you'll see posts like this too. And genuinely just someone had posted, hey, like new to Australia, looking for friends, blah, blah, blah. And I had just messaged someone off the back of that post that I'd seen, who actually ended up to be Imogen, and is now literally one of my best friends out here. So I met her through Facebook. People always, I don't know why in particular, people always ask Imogen and I how we met, and it was through Facebook. And then most of our other friends now since then have kind of been like through friends of friends, like a girl that I know from uni, like a friend of a friend is over here. And then I've met her friends through that. And then Erin and Russell, funny story, actually, we met them through a house viewing. So they were going to move in with us at one point before we knew them. And we were just chatting at the house viewing. And then we just, you know, decided to go for dinner one random night after that and just stayed in touch. And now they're some of our closest friends. And then Dan and Kira, who you guys have seen on my videos before, Stephen actually went to uni with Dan, so that's how he knows Dan. And then saying that since all of these people have moved over, I've had friends from uni move over, so I've now got them. And yeah, so it's just, you know, I think once you've sort of got one or two friends, it's very easy to start making more. But yeah, you're not alone if you have struggled to make friends over here, because honestly, it was a really rubbish time, to be honest with you. And this probably led to why we were so unsure about staying or going at that point in time, because, you know, it can be lonely and it's isolating. And the thing is, like, you don't want to rely on your boyfriend all the time. Like, I hated that. So yeah, it's definitely hard to make friends initially, but you've just got to put yourself out there and join a sports team, or like genuinely just talk to people at the gym, talk to people on nights out, like just be a friendly person, put yourself out there. There's hundreds of people in the same situation that have come over here by themselves as well. And that was honestly just my downfall, and where I went wrong is that I didn't put myself out there. So I think if you put yourself out there and join those friends groups, like you can find friends pretty easily. One thing I am going to just really quickly touch on, because I feel like loads of people ask me about this, but is, do I see snakes and spiders all the time? I've been here for 3.5 years. I have seen one snake out and about, not in Sydney. This was in Jarvis Bay. Funny story, actually. There was this one snake, well, we were in Jarvis Bay and we were walking back to the toilets before we drove back to our Airbnb. And there was a huge crowd of people looking into this like little wooded area. And I said to Stephen, that's got to be a snake. Like, there's no reason why a group of people would be bunched around like that. So we walked over and I was looking for the snake, and I just couldn't see it. And then this guy's next to me was like, oh, it's there, it's there, it's there. Genuinely, for about 10 minutes, I could not find this snake. Like, that's how well camouflaged it was, and people were literally pointing to it. Eventually, we did see it. It was a red belly snake, which is poisonous. But I mean, this thing was still miles away, not miles away, but meters away from us. And even knowing it was there, I couldn't see it. So aside from that, we haven't seen any other snakes here. We have seen one poisonous spider, which was in WA, Western Australia, which was a redback. Caused us no issues. It was just like under a table. We left it alone. It didn't move the whole time we were staying in this Airbnb that was there. However, we have seen a lot of huntsman spiders. I will say that. And huntsmans are the ones that are like this big. I'll post a picture here of what a huntsman looks like. We have had a good few of those. However, they're not poisonous. They don't tend to bite humans. I don't know if they do or don't bite humans, but they're not dangerous to humans, and they tend to just mind their own business. Like, usually they're actually a good thing to have in your house, because it means that they're killing and eating the smaller animals that can be in your house. So yeah, honestly, snakes and spiders, I like would not let that bother you in the slightest, like at all. The only things I have seen really out here, you do get cockroaches quite a lot. Like, you genuinely just get used to cockroaches. And the only other thing that really freaked me out one day, again, it was all in this double bay house. I think because in that double bay house, we had like a balcony and then a pool, and then we overlooked like this wooded area. So I guess everything just came from the wooded area. But we saw a possum, and I'd never seen a possum before. And all I saw one night in our living room, in our kitchen, sorry, was like this giant thing run across outside with a huge tail, and I thought it was a rat, and I was like, that is the biggest rat I've ever seen. But it was a possum. And again, they don't really do anything, so you don't really come into close contact with them. They're nocturnal, so they're just out and about in the evenings. But yeah, genuinely, like, animals are not something that you should be worried about in the slightest. Now, my camera battery is about to die any second, so I guess I'm going to wrap this video up here with just one final question, which is, do I want to stay? And my answer is absolutely 100%, like, I want to stay here. Hopefully, the way things are going at the moment, it's looking possible that we're going to be able to stay here and keep extending our visas and hopefully get permanent residency. But, you know, the Australian government changes things all the time, so, you know, just take things with a pinch of salt. But yeah, that is a plan. Want to stay for sure. I love it here so much. I'm so happy here, and genuinely, if any of you guys are thinking about moving over, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to answer any questions. And yeah, that's kind of everything that I've got time to cover today before my battery dies. Also, I'm just looking out the window. We've got the most unreal sunset at the moment. I don't know if you can see this random color here in the TV reflection, but like that pink is literally what my whole outside looks like at the moment. So that's lovely. But yeah, anyway, I'm going to wrap this up now. If you stuck around to the end, thank you so much for watching. I hope that this was really useful for you. And if you are thinking about moving to Sydney, just do it. Don't think about it, just do it. Anyway, we'll catch you up in next week's video. Thanks for watching.